dumbfounded about stigma and discrimination and life on the borderline. Some of you will be familiar, some of you may be meeting Mahlie for the very first time today, but I'd like to introduce you to Mahlie. I sort of feel like Mahlie Jewell, you might be best placed to introduce yourself as well, or would you like me to do some of that? I can. So Mahlie's advocacy on the experience of living with borderline personality disorder, PTSD and brain injury have been published nationally, and she now advocates on the importance of specialised services and lifestyle mindfulness in achieving meaningful recovery. She's an active social justice advocate and is currently working with Project AIR and the Department of Education concerning teenagers and self-harm behaviours. Now, Mahlie is also a qualified counsellor, intentional peer support worker and graphic artist, and she has worked in the not-for-profit community service sector for over 10 years and now specialises in design and campaign work. You'll see a lot of the design that Mahlie has produced for this conference around. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Mahlie Jewell.
Hi. I'm a bit nervous about this today. That girl that you just saw on the screen is one of my best friends, and normally she's here with me, and her not being here is having a massive impact on me right now. Sherida is fine, the surgery went great. She'll be out of hospital in 3 days. So I'm a little bit nervous about this because I'm going to talk today about stigma, and it's not a nice topic, and it's a painful topic. But first, before I do that, I want to acknowledge that we meet today on Aboriginal land, and I want to thank Songwon Marichi for her beautiful, beautiful welcome. I want to thank the terrible people for thousands of years of protection of these lands, and I also want to acknowledge that this land was never ceded, and that we are sitting today on stolen land. I also want to acknowledge the trauma that has been left by that theft, and the trauma still continues. And at every opportunity, I lend my voice to uphold the human rights of all Indigenous people of this land, with respect to elders, both past and present, including my own, who are Wiradjuri, and with solidarity for future generations. Is it working? I also hold space for and acknowledge the many people who have carved out the path for consumer advocacy, especially those few who have talked about their experience with BPD. I also hold space for those who are no longer with us and who remind me of why I do this work, and that's first and foremost to end unnecessary death by suicide and overdose. In my experience as a survivor of both those things, I see suicide as a symptom of a broken and fractured community, and something that we are all responsible for working towards. Fixing, obviously. There was supposed to be a slide before this, wait. It's gone, whatever. So today I'm going to be talking about stigma and discrimination. And so like I said, it's not a good topic. I'm going to be talking about some really distressing things today, and my presentation by necessity contains distressing language and some distressing images. I really want to stress to the people in the room today who have a lived experience to please, and carers as well, to please leave if you need to. It's important for me to expose the level of stigma that we face. So some of this stuff isn't very nice at all. But what I will say is that if you stick with me, I promise that we will finish in a place that is better than where we started from. But first we have to go back and look at where we started from. So I'm going to talk about stigma, discrimination, life on the borderline. So let me discriminate for once in my life. So if you feel comfortable to, and you're happy to do it, I want all the people in the room who don't identify as having a lived experience of BPD to close their eyes. So imagine that you've been sick for a really long time, and it comes and goes and everything is really overwhelming. And you look for any way you can to silence the feelings that constantly steamroll you. You try and make it all be quiet, and for a moment that wave recedes. But it always comes back, sometimes even more painful than before. So you try and you sit through it. You want to ask for help, but the thoughts inside of your heads that are screams only come out as whispers. So you try and you try. You try to distract yourself, but the pain becomes too much and you break. You give up, and in that last moment of unbearable darkness, you open your eyes and you're in a stark white room with bright lights and people who are much more respected than you. They say, it's time to stop hiding the symptoms. It's time to take control. They say you are hurting. They say they can tell you what's wrong, that they can help you. You can open your eyes now. They tell you that they have a treatment plan. They talk about positive outcomes, new research, choices of care, and public awareness campaigns. Friends rally around you. They run marathons for you. And every day you're filled with a room of fresh flowers and beautiful cards. The doctors and nurses smile at you as they treat you. And they high-five you when you start to feel better. Your scars are seen as the aftermath of victory, and they're celebrated by all. They use words like brave, inspiring, fighter, strong. And you are regularly checked on and assessed for any new signs that the monster might return. Your treatment works and you are free. You are a warrior and a survivor. They tell you that you have beaten cancer. If you can, close your eyes again. So let's go back to that overbearing darkness and into that stark white room with bright lights and faces of people who are much more respected than you. Instead, this time, they say it's time you stopped creating symptoms. It's time you take control. You are hurting everyone around you. You are taking up their valuable time. You are causing others to miss out. They say they can tell you what's wrong, but that they can't help you. You're not able to be fixed. Open your eyes. They tell you that there is no treatment plan, no positive outcome, and no choices of care. Your scars show how beyond help you are. They use words like liar, untrustworthy, unstable, and exhausting. You call your friends, but they don't pick up the phone. No one comes. You're a burden and a drama queen. They get you out of the hospital as fast as they can, and they don't bother to follow up. The diagnosis they give you becomes how the world sees you, and every time the vicious cycle continues itself, you are controlled by these three little words: borderline personality disorder. It's not just that they can't help you, but more so that they seem to hate you. They say you are draining, engulfing, demanding, and devouring. You're manipulating, likely to annoy, and unlikely to improve. These are comments that were direct quotes from nurses and doctors taken from studies conducted in the 1980s. But almost 2 decades later, not much had changed. Stigma designs the path to discrimination, and discrimination leads to a lack of information and education. It causes disrespect, neglect, consumer invisibility, and isolation. It results in the lack of access to services, the increase of symptoms in both frequency and severity. It affects the caring relationships between friends and families and leaves carers despondent, desperate, and without hope. In my own life, stigma and discrimination embedded the messages I had received from those around me from the moment I was born. The doctors and nurses reinforced what I had always known about myself, that I was unworthy of care, inconvenient, and incredibly broken. Through their lack of hope, dismissal, and frustrations, they recreated the trauma that lived inside of me. With every rejection and discharge, I became more fused with my negative self-view and my lack of hope. Their words blended with my own, and together we created a miserable narrative, a story that was sad and devoid of all hope. It's important to note that these observations were never meant for me to see. They were the secret notes written about me to forewarn the next doctor who would dismiss me. It took 2 years of fighting for even my doctor to access these files. And another year before he would allow me to see them, for fear that they would destroy me all over again. I had, like many people in this room, endured years of sitting in public view in cold waiting rooms, soaked in blood. Hours and hours spent on a hard plastic chair that I had dubbed the crazy chair, facing the nurses' stations. They could constantly watch me, but never truly see me. I had heard every berating lecture from every nurse that ever existed. Why do you do this to yourself? We have people here who need actual help. They are really dying. You're just an attention seeker who is choosing to do this and waste my time. But my story is one of millions, and we aren't here to focus on that. I asked a simple question of people with a lived experience of BPD. I asked, how have you been affected by stigma and discrimination associated with living with BPD? I got 100 replies, which was the maximum my free survey tool could hold. And as I continue to speak, I want to share with you their experiences, and also the experiences of their carers and their clinicians. So standing here in 2018, I asked myself, why do they hate us? But the answers that I got made me understand their reactions a little better. Most mental health professionals do not receive appropriate education about people living with BPD. They are uneducated about who we are and why we do the things we do. They don't know what our behaviours truly represent. They work in a system that doesn't allow adequate time or space for meaningful engagement. They are under-resourced, undereducated, and emotionally spent. If clinical staff themselves are not able to access support to treat us or taught we can recover, how can they support, foster hope and recovery in us? Training needs to change. It must be recovery focused and written with consumer and carer perspectives. This is happening slowly, but many barriers still stand in the way. The media is one of those barriers. I went looking for BPD role models on the internet, and this is what I found. Would have been such an awesome reveal. Wrecked my own presentation. So apparently, some academic diagnosed the Dark Lord with BPD. And in some psychological classes, they teach his story, which is actually terrifying. But it's pretty good to know that I'm in such great company as like an icon, like Darth Vader. And then, of course, the usual suspects showed up. Why is this not working? Princess Diana, Marilyn Monroe, and Lindsay Lohan, which isn't shocking. These are three women who struggled with unstable family situations and experienced exploitation and trauma at the hands of the world. They had very public self-harming behaviours. Their flaws and shortcomings were beamed out to the world. For young people diagnosed with BPD, these individuals aren't the positive role models that they need for recovery. So I'm going to give an extra trigger warning for this section. This contains some really suggestive imagery and some really horrific imagery. I'll try and move past them as fast as I can. So when you type borderline meme, does everyone know what a meme is? I don't know how to explain. It's like you know how you see like those pictures and then there'll be like a caption to the picture and it's supposed to be funny or whatever. That's a meme. And you're hit with a wave of stigma, bullying, discrimination, and jokes that simply aren't funny. Many humiliate and belittle people struggling with the worst symptoms of BPD, such as self-harm, suicidal ideation, emotional impulse, and deep suffering. They also rely on misogyny. And for those of you that are unaware, SJW stands for Social Justice Warrior. And it's basically stigmatises women who are feminist and left-leaning liberal thinkers, so me, basically. Self-stigma is also promoted very heavily for those, so for memes that are kind of created for us to laugh at ourselves, except that the jokes really aren't funny and it's clear that we're being laughed at and not with. It's important for clinicians, services and carers to understand these things because these are the narratives that are filling the spaces in people's minds. These are the things that are answering the questions that they have about themselves. Bullying has become an epidemic and people diagnosed with BPD are incredibly sensitive and reactive to words. Words are weapons and they are often aimed quite sharply at people who display symptoms of BPD. So how does stigma and discrimination affect possible recovery? Well, for me, the unhelpful responses I got meant I simply stopped turning up. The system had proven itself such a poor caregiver that even the people around me refused to access it. And I had friends who were nurses. So they stocked my cupboards with medical supplies, taught me basic wound care, and even gave me stitches in my own living room. They did not have a lack of understanding about the system. They just knew how very broken it was. And they had seen the immense harm it had caused me and wanted to protect me from it. Not much ever came from my hospitalisations because nothing was ever resolved. This isn't to say that it didn't save my life at times, but although the staff kept my heart beating, they were also complacent to the trauma I was subject to when placed in a ward, locked in a room, chemically restrained or punished for outbursts because I had nowhere for my anger to go. And they became my new abusers, and they were the enemy. For many, it seems that BPD is a brand that follows them no matter where they go and what they do. The irony of this diagnosis is that no level of recovery seems good enough to allow us to step outside of it. We can be asymptomatic, but still treated as though we are acutely unwell, seen as unable to have actual physical health issues, unable to be trusted and relied upon, and unable to love and be loved. We are whole human beings, and we heal and we grow. And this blatant discrimination needs to stop. For many people diagnosed with BPD, change is slow. We often have very limited ways of communicating. Normally, they are seen as self-harming or aggressive. Many label us treatment resistant when scared, confused, and overwhelmed are probably better descriptors. So change takes time, and expert knowledge and the genuine building of caring and trusting relationships with clinicians are things that needs to happen. There are also things that many hospitals do not have access to. This is changing, and DBT programs, the gold standard treatment for BPD, are finally available through many hospitals in most states. This change has come out of necessity and brave and strong consumers and carers who have stood up worked hard and demanded better. They weren't alone. They were joined by a few clinicians with their hearts in the right place. These clinicians are like us in many ways. They're outsiders. Brave and strong souls who wanted to make change and stop the epidemic they saw in front of them. I often wonder if patients and carers know that many of these groups are run outside of their core work and that they do them sometimes on a volunteer basis. It's important to talk about the stigma they also carry. DBT practitioners are asked to step outside many of their acceptable professional boundaries. They are asked to take on patients that require a high level of care, time, and accessibility that is not traditionally acceptable within the clinician and patient relationship. They face their own discrimination within their professional community. They experience high levels of burnout, vicarious trauma, and self-doubt. It's important to me to acknowledge them and their bravery and to ask them also to not give up. It seems the opposite sometimes, but we are glad you are here and we want you on our team. There are people in this room that don't realise that their program saved my life, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to express that. Carers have been perhaps our loudest voices. They have also faced incredible stigma and discrimination by many, including doctors, nurses, and the wider community. Their voices have been essential because for a long time, many people living with BPD could not safely speak up. This is still a massive issue, which is why we see a lot of people suffering in silence, but it is changing. Treatment and recovery can be a long, painful road, which is why we don't see more consumer and carer teams like Sherida and Carrie Ann. So for those who are still with us and still loving us through it all, thank you for taking some of the weight. And thank you for doing all you can to protect us from the discrimination and demanding treatment and respect for us all. So how do we move forward together? Well, first and foremost, it must be together. All of us, without blame, shame, ego, or hierarchy. We work together and we listen to each other and we support each other. We start at the beginning and we educate. We continue to learn and search. We ask hard questions. We remain open to the answers, no matter how hard they are to hear. We see the human and not the disorder, and we treat the symptoms and not the diagnosis. We follow the human, not a textbook. We make mistakes and we apologise for them as many times as we need to apologise for them. We ask for space. We do not take it by force. We remain quiet and wait to hear. We let the future guide us, but we let go of our past. We shine lights in dark spaces, provide hope, and when we identify problems, we come with solutions. If you've spent any time with me in a room, you'll know that I say that last one a lot, that when we identify problems, we come with solutions. I went the wrong way. So as a community, we've been talking a lot about stigma and its effect on BPD. We talk a lot about doing something about it, and those conversations are done with real intentions. They're just not backed up with a ton of cash normally. So this year we decided we were done with the conversation and the time seemed right, overright. The past 5 years, I've been involved in working to change the narrative of borderline personality disorder. I don't dislike my diagnosis. I don't want to change my diagnosis. I don't want to rename it. I don't want to do any of those things. I want to change how people see it, just like they did with schizophrenia. But through my job as a designer in the not-for-profit sector, I've got a skill that I've learned, and that's about engaging humans and raising the profile of hard-to-access issues. So, for context, I've worked on national domestic violence campaigns and substance use campaigns. And this has set me up pretty well for designing this campaign. So with that in mind, and with the support of my fellow members of the New South Wales branch of the Foundation, I contacted the board of the Australian Foundation, and I pitched an idea. It was a national strategy to support the 2018 BPD Awareness Week with an anti-stigma campaign. Not surprisingly, this wasn't a new idea, and the Foundation had already been brainstorming this. They had a really catchy title. All they needed was a plan and someone to execute it. So No BPD No Stigma was born. We know there's a lot of negative talks out there surrounding BPD, and we acknowledge this, but we use a strength-based approach to change the narrative around the words. We're also really thankful to receive a grant from the National Mental Health Commission to make this a possibility. We truly believe that education leads to understanding, and with understanding comes compassion, and compassion leads to empathy. We believe that people, once they truly know the facts about BPD, will see the complex human beings behind it, and this will decrease stigma and end the discrimination. We simply believe that to know and understand BPD will eventually result in no stigma. The campaign delivers facts in an accessible way. It aims to be non-threatening. It promotes recovery, positivity, and hope. It asks for compassion, empathy, and understanding. And as you can see, evident via the colour theory and the graphic identity marks, they're designed to be whimsical, imperfect, and comforting. But they deliver strong, empowering messages. Voices are really important to us. Listening to the experts themselves, like consumers and carers. And of course, bringing the strong voices of our allies in the treatment, research, and caring communities, like Bryn over there. Our professors, mental health clinicians, and support workers. The campaign is designed using co-design and co-production principles, which means the users design the product with the support of myself, the designer. Consultation and feedback is sought at every point of production in a systemic way that removes hierarchy and power roles by anonymous input. This means that no one has a more powerful voice than anyone else, and decisions are made by majority impact. Co-design has a really strong evidence-based research behind it, and it's a method of design that requires specialisation. It's the main method of my practice and something that I've chosen to specialise in. So the project is not finished yet, obviously. So this is a sneak preview of all the campaign that will launch on the 1st of October, which is the start of BPD Awareness Week. We have events in 6 states and territories, and at this point, so we really want to make sure that you sign up and you get involved and you make BPD Awareness Week really loud. You can follow us on social media as well. Please make sure that through today, and you'll be seeing them all around, and Awareness Week, that you find time for self-care. Please look around at our campaign material and fill in a feedback form on the Foundation's table. I did have one, Eileen's waving it around. We need you to fill in this form because with this form, I'm going to use this data to hound people to give me more money to print more things. So please fill it in because I need to say, look at all these people that said that we should have this. So please, 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 fill it in. I want to thank you for staying with me on what's been a bit of a heartbreaking journey for myself. This has been one of the hardest presentations that I've ever written. It's taken me a long time to write it. Obviously, I had to read some really ignorant words. I had to look at some really horrific images, which I had to then Photoshop, so I wasn't going to trigger everybody in the room. And I had to sit with those things. I want everyone in this room to know that if you were one of the people that completed one of the 4 surveys that we put out, I read every single one of your words, and your words were important, and your words were the words that I just showed. They're important to me and they matter to everybody involved in this project. And on that, I want to say that I'm really lucky that I've not had to hold on to this alone. I want to acknowledge my partner in crime and personal cheerleader, Karen Bailey, from the South Australian branch. Wave out. She is the conduit between you and this project. She's the one who spent hours collecting information, and I just really make it pretty. Meeting her and working with her on this project has made it more than just a job for me. She's an amazing sounding board, fact checker, an organisational guru, and without her, I'd probably still be lost in Adelaide. I cannot say enough wonderful things about her, except to say that if you like our campaign, please make sure you tell her so. If you don't like the campaign, tell her so as well. Don't tell me. It's all her fault. And I want to also acknowledge the hard work that the Australian BPD Foundation and the board and the collaboration group have done with this project as well. Their feedback and suggestions and the content and the guidance that they've given me, especially Rita Brown, obviously, who has been so trusting of us and encouraging of Karen and I. And I just want to really say that I really believe that we can rewrite the narrative behind BPD and change the conversation. If I was able to rewrite my brain's entire blueprint and become the person that I am today from where I was, then pretty much anything is possible. And the last thing I want to say is that to all the people in the room who have a lived experience, the first step to destroying stigma and discrimination is recovering. So much like Kez was talking about and like other people have talked about, prove them wrong. That keeps me going all the time. Like, I do exactly what Kez does. I email people that told me that I was going to be dead and that I was worthless. And I'm like, well, I just went to my 30th country, so I don't really know. Look at me on a stage. Like, whatever. If someone tells you that you can't recover, they're not the right clinician for you, or they're not the right friend for you. Find somebody else. You know, keep moving on. Don't waste your time. To the carers in the room, I want to thank you for your patience and kindness. It's important for me to acknowledge that I never actually had a carer, so I'm getting them now, and I'm very grateful for them. But also, what I want to tell you is something that it's important for you to know for recovery. You need to take care of yourselves. Stop putting other people first. Take care of yourselves and don't feel guilty about that. And for the people that work with us, the clinicians and the professors and, you know, the fancy dudes with the titles, I want to thank you so much for continuing to work with us. And I truly acknowledge that sometimes you walk a bit of a lonely path as well. But I also want to thank you for being who you are and having that hope and recovery, because without that, we wouldn't have it ourselves. Some of the best things that my clinicians ever did was that they didn't walk ahead of me, but they also didn't even walk beside me. They walked a really tiny step behind me, and they encouraged me to lead. And when I fell back, they were there. So I think that's really important, to lead from behind in a way. This is the last thing I have to say. This is my last slide. I don't even need to say anything about this. Margaret Mead's one of my personal heroes. And every time I think that we won't be able to overcome things, I look at this quote and I realise how true it is. And I want to thank every single one of you thoughtful, committed citizens that are in the room right now. And I think in 20 years there will be no need for me to step onto this podium and say this again, and I'm really happy about that because I'll be too old by then. But thank you very much for coming with me.